Welcome back to The Gap, the podcast where we tackle one of the biggest challenges in America today, closing the retirement savings gap and the retirement coverage gap, while also shining a light on what's actually working in our system. Today's episode is a special one. My guest is Lisa Gomez, a nationally recognized leader in employee benefits and retirement policy, and the former head of the Employee Benefits Security Administration at the U.S. Department of Labor. In that role, she was responsible for protecting the retirement security of over 150 million Americans and overseeing trillions of dollars in retirement assets. But what makes Lisa's story so compelling isn't just the title, it's the journey. She spent decades on the front lines as benefits attorney, advocating for workers and navigating the complexities of ERISA before stepping into one of the most influential regulatory roles in the country. And now she's entered a new chapter, bringing that experience into the private sector and continuing to shape the future of retirement from a different vantage point. Lisa has seen the system from every angle: legal, regulatory, and now strategic. And she has a unique perspective on what's working, what's not, and what we need to do to truly move the needle. So today we're going to dig into her journey, what she learned during her time at EBSA, and most importantly, what she believes it will take to close the gaps in savings and coverage that still exist in America. This is going to be a thoughtful, insightful, and I think very honest conversation. Lisa, welcome to The Gap.
Thanks so much, Shannon. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you. You've spent nearly 3 decades as an employee benefits attorney before stepping into one of the most influential regulatory roles in the country. What initially drew you to employee benefits and retirement policy?
So when I was thinking just about being a lawyer, and even just going into whether or not to be a lawyer, I went into it thinking that I wanted to help people. I wanted to find a way that I could work with real people to address real problems that they were having. And so I was attracted to the law. And then obviously, once you get into deciding to be a lawyer, like what kind of lawyer are you going to be? And I um, did some internships when I was in law school, working with the National Labor Relations Board, working with judges, and eventually got an internship working with a labor and employment law firm. So it was a little bit of, accidental getting into that specific area. And because I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but it was a really good fit for me because having come from a working class family, and seeing both for my parents, struggles that they had gone through, we had gone through, growing up, and in not having all of the job protections that, that some people are fortunate enough to have, being in a profession, my dad worked in a profession where he did not have a retirement plan. We all know it's a voluntary system. You don't have to have these things, or employers don't have to offer those things. And so knowing, sort of as my parents were nearing their retirement age, that they did not have, these things that lots of people kind of take for granted, that they didn't even have them available to them. So many people take for granted having a 401k with your job that you can participate in. So that was really something that was pretty stark to me. And so I was drawn to working with, being in a firm and practicing so that I could do things to help people, to help workers in particular. And as far as getting into ERISA, when I started practicing, there were no ERISA classes that were available in law school. The employee benefits was literally a chapter in my employment law treatise, in
Yeah.
class that I don't even think we honestly ever got to,
Yeah.
nobody talked about it. Nobody knew anything about it. And when I went to the law firm, they just happened to be hiring an associate in their employee benefits department. And I tell folks that, that I was asked, do you want to be hired in the employee benefits department? I was coming out of law school. I said, hey, it's a job, sure, why not? I ended up really liking it and enjoying the work. And, a couple of years into the job, some of the people who were doing more traditional labor law work, employment law work, said, like, hey, good news. We have an opening and we can save you from that horrible employee benefits work that you've been doing all of this time. That's probably super boring and technical. And I said, you know what? I actually like doing this work. And I continued doing it for 30 years. And I loved doing it. We worked for, I worked for so many different types of, mostly in the plans, in the Taft-Hartley plan sponsor. So like
Hmm.
collectively bargain plan, um, end of things, but in all different types of industries, which was the most fun, working
Yeah.
for, doing work for plans that covered people in the entertainment industry, people who were truck drivers, people who were ballet dancers, people who were nurses, people, and so for airline pilots. So with each and with large companies, very small companies, and plans that were run, either as a pretty sophisticated enterprise
Hmm.
to things that were, in the basement of Union Hall run by a former hairdresser. I mean, it really ran the gamut, and I loved that about it. So that's kind of, that's how I got into it. It was a little bit by accident, but it all, worked out really well. It was super, super interesting to me.
So you've spoken about growing up in a working class family without access to strong benefits. How did that personal experience shape your passion for this work?
Yeah, so I think that thinking about how much stress there can be upon an individual, upon a family, in trying to think about like how are you going to think long term and how long are you going to have to work and how can you provide for your family? How can you feel that you are going to be able to at some time, like during the course of your working life, putting retirement aside for a moment, but
Mhm.
just with having health benefits and, having, to think twice about can you go to the dentist? Do we have dental coverage? Can we go to the doctor? I mean, if there is, and obviously this was also before the days of, some of the more recent protections that came into play, but, it was definitely something to be thinking about whether or not, you can afford to fill prescriptions because maybe the coverage wasn't there, maybe it wasn't good enough. Can you attend to certain types of medical conditions that one might have? So just know, or maybe, you can do those things, but for a certain year, like we can't do other things
Mhm.
because, someone had a medical condition that, needed to be addressed. So just knowing all of the stressors that can happen within a family. And I mean, thankfully, we were fortunate that we didn't have any kind of major health crises happen. But knowing, other people that we knew or people that maybe, in our neighborhood, in our community that really did face financial ruin, bankruptcy, because
Mhm.
something like that would come up. So knowing those things and also just knowing the uncertainty of, not having retirement plans, thinking both for my parents who, worked very hard during their lives, but did not know, like going into retirement, how much, would Social Security be there for them? What's it like to
Mhm.
be living on Social Security? I mean, is that even realistic? And then also with the sandwich generation, thinking about, okay, now how much do I need to factor in myself, not only taking care of myself, but taking care of my children, taking care of my parents. And, again, my parents were, between a combination of kind of luck and hard work, they were able to manage it, even without having all of those protections. But not everyone's story is like that. So it made me really appreciate that like these types of benefits, having Having benefits at all and having benefits that you can rely upon is not something that you should take for granted or people can take for
Mhm.
granted, and the importance of it, and also the importance of just making sure that people understand the value of it and the meaningfulness of it. Um, was something that, shaped sort of my whole career and then shaped also just me when I was going into the Department of Labor.
Yeah, I grew up in a similar background. My dad was a CPA, and he had his own firm, but it was largely based on people in the energy industry and oil. And so when I was in high school, we had the oil bust in Oklahoma. So, and all of his clients were going out of business, which obviously put stress on him and his partners. And I was
Hmm.
old enough to understand what was going on and what the impact was to our family financially. And so that really shaped kind of like my relationship with money and my ideas about savings. And it really did shape my passion for being able to help people, all over the country, working Americans actually, be able to retire with dignity, which is, why I love coming to work every day. And I think we're so lucky to be able to work in this industry.
Yeah, no, that's great. And it is so important to kind of take those life lessons that you learn. And, on just on your story, it's one of these things that people can, look at a certain occupation and say, well, you have these people who are professionals, they're
Hmm.
CPAs, they should be fine. But if you're a small firm and you are really relying upon a certain industry, and
Hmm.
that industry, something happens. I mean, obviously, just even looking back at 2008,
Yeah.
and what happened, there were so many people, as we all well know, who thought that either in their own professions, or with their retirement savings, that they would be fine. And the
Hmm.
world can literally change, in a moment. And so being able to help people both prepare themselves for those potential changes that might happen, and like life throws you curveballs in lots of different ways, and also to be able to, like, both for individuals and also for industries, like how do you weather those changes and be able to sometimes, make lemonade out of lemons,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's, I think they're good skills to have, because if you haven't had to go through the hard times, sometimes it's difficult to navigate or to kind of think about how to get out of them in the
Yeah.
future.
Agreed. Before leaving EBSA, you were a partner at Cohen, Weiss, and Simon. What lessons from private practice most prepared you for leading a federal agency?
Oh, that's a good one. So I think I would say a couple of different things. One is that being a practitioner and working with plan sponsors for that long, even though it was, in a different context and working more with defined benefit plans, there were clients that had defined contribution plans as well, but working with people who were dealing with things in the real world, and
Hmm.
knowing how plans actually worked and challenges that plans actually faced, and how when you have a rule, or guidance, or an investigation that might happen, and being on the other side of that and trying to talk with a regulator or an investigator or a legislator about, like, how is this going to actually work in practice? Like, a lot of times, even for the most well-intentioned people, there's a real gap. You talk about a
Hmm.
gap but there's a huge gap there.
Yeah.
And so I think for myself, having spent so much time in the world of, actually trying to implement guidance, laws, regulations, like expectations. Um, that was a tremendous help for me going into the Department of Labor, which was a path that I had never like really anticipated going into. And, in thinking about other people who have served in the role that I served in,
Mhm.
there really were not there wasn't someone who, like, at least in very recent years, who had had that kind of a background that
Mhm.
I had, that was not, and they all contributed, and had the benefits of different types of backgrounds that helped in other ways. But when you have people who are coming from the Hill, coming from within government, coming from within government agencies, or again, like working as staffers, working as educators, all of these different things, but had not had the day-to-day of like trying to sit down with clients, with plan sponsors, and thinking about, funding issues that can change very quickly, communicating with participants. How do we get people to engage? How do we deal
Mhm.
with participant appeals, or communicating, hard, difficult changes that, try as you may, like, you just got stuck in a really bad situation, and you did everything you could and you're trying to fix this. Dealing with litigation that sometimes, you had to make difficult decisions, and you knew that being sued was going to be a potential, issue at the end, and or dealing with litigation that you knew, you really had done everything correctly, and now you're getting sued anyway. So having all of those different experiences going into the position was really, really helpful to me, to give that perspective and to be able to sit down with not only people who were working at the agency and in different departments and in the administration, to be able to communicate to them. I mean, there were times that I literally, we would be sitting in a meeting and I would say, okay, you know that this is not how it actually works, right? Like your assumptions are, it's no offense to you because you've never been there, but that's not, I get why you think that that's how this works. It's not how this works,
Yes,
and
yes.
it would be helpful to them.
Yeah.
But so so all of that definitely was helpful to me, and I think also helpful to them. So that part of the experience, also having been someone who focused a lot with clients on communication,
Mhm.
whether it be drafting a summary plan description, drafting a notice, about, again, something that was required, or something, that we just needed to tell people, having town halls, to communicate either really good news or sometimes really not great news. Thinking of all of that and then translating that into the Department of Labor, where I was very focused on, with things that we were doing, making sure that people understood that EBSA existed, like
Mhm.
what our purpose was, why we were there, how we could be helpful, like what we do on a day-to-day basis, and then also with things that we were putting out, whether it be our website or regular anything from like an actual regulation to something we would post on a website, a
Mhm.
blog of mine, or me going out and talking uh, uh, with different, organizations, individuals, whatever the case may be. Um, Communication of it all, and like what the messaging was going to be, and in particular, trying to communicate to people at all different levels, like no matter what role you were in the process, or like where you were from, like whether
Mhm.
you work for a certain type of industry, or you are in a certain part of the country, or you are, a man, a woman, of a certain race, like whatever, like trying to really think a lot about that, and think about like how can I how can we be communicating things in a way that people can not only understand it, but understand the relevance and importance to them, you know?
Yeah.
So that I took from that. And then also finally, I mean, towards the latter part of my career, I was the head of the management committee for the firm itself. We were a
Hmm.
relatively small firm, about 50 employees total. But it taught me a lot about management and kind of dealing with, obviously, even though EBSA was a small agency, it was way bigger than a 50 person,
Hmm.
50 employee firm, but, knew about sort of just the running of the business. And I think both in running an agency, but also in thinking as an employer myself,
Hmm.
in addition to being one of the few people who had come into this role having worked with plan sponsors, I think I was one of the few people who had come into this role being an employer
Hmm.
myself and having to think about providing, retirement benefits, providing health benefits, dealing with employees. So there were all of those different experiences were super helpful to me in, being to bring all of those experiences into this role and trying to use them in a way to be as effective as possible.
Yeah. When you stepped into EBSA, you suddenly had responsibility for protecting benefits for over 150 Americans. What? That's a lot of Americans.
Yeah.
What? What did that responsibility feel like on day one?
Yeah. I mean, I will say completely honestly that I well, I won't say day one, but I'll say more like kind of not day one on the job versus day one of like accepting the nomination and kind
Hmm.
of going through the process. I learned more and more about like what this job meant, like what the responsibilities of this position were.
Hmm.
And I mean, had never really focused on the immense responsibility that EBSA and the leader of that agency has. Like to say, to throw out these numbers when you're just looking at them saying 100, over 150 million Americans, over 800,000 retirement plans, over 2.5 million health plans. It sounds over $12 trillion. And just sounds like blah, blah, blah. Lots of numbers, big
Yeah.
numbers. But when you are the actual person and thinking that what we are doing here and the decisions that at the end of the day I am responsible for, and if, any stakeholder, whether it be, someone on the Hill or a private stakeholder, or, at that time, my boss, who is the President of the United States, well, I guess like interim, but
Hmm.
first a cabinet secretary, and then the President of the United States could pick up the phone and say, like, "Hey, Gomez, what the heck are you doing?"
Yeah.
It was a big deal. Or down to an individual participant who could be calling and saying, "Hey, Gomez, what are you doing? Or what are your people doing? Like, my family is suffering here. Like, and I
Hmm.
need you to pay attention." It's an incredible responsibility, both, it's a privilege and it's also something that certainly keeps you awake at night.
Yeah.
Thinking about, anything that any of us do within this industry is equally important in the sense
Hmm.
that there is a person behind those numbers,
Yep.
and we can never forget that. Um, and saying all of that, being the person who is, having people, being in some of those initial days of that job and having people come into my office, whether they were people who worked with me or, stakeholders contacting me and, knowing that you are like the buck stops with you and
Hmm.
you need to make this decision. Are we going to proceed with that? How are we, we can go this way or this way. Which way are we going to go? And that it's very different from having the impact of those decisions affect one particular client or
Hmm.
one particular firm or one particular lawsuit, as opposed
Yeah.
to it is going to affect everything. So, yeah, no pressure. Um, I think I got a lot more I had to pay a lot pay more frequently to like, keep the grays away or,
Yeah. Yeah.
find ways to avoid stress. But
Yeah.
yeah, so
Because then you've got the TPAs going, "Hey, Gomez, what are you doing?" And
yeah,
you've got the
exactly.
financial advisors going, "Hey, Gomez, what are you doing? What are you
Right,
thinking?"
right. And,
Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely not a job. If you want to try to go into a position saying, I want to be a people pleaser and make everyone happy, it's impossible to do
Right.
that. I think though one thing that I, did have in my background and tried to take with me, and, completely honestly, it didn't always work. But I had from when I was in law school, I had done mediation in
Hmm.
different kind of formats. When I was in law school, I did mediation in Manhattan Small Claims Court as part of a class, right? And let me tell you, I mean, that is an experience. But I continued to do volunteer mediation in small claims courts in New Jersey.
Hmm.
And I'm just kind of like, that's my and I did, worked in collective bargaining, and trying to like come to mutually agreeable endpoints to the extent we can, worked on service provide. So that's like kind of my trying to find if there is consensus and common ground on things. And you can't always do it because at the end of the day, you do have to make a decision and not everybody's going to be happy with it. But
Hmm.
trying to, bring that into this, to the position and at least have everyone feel that they were heard.
Hmm.
And you may not get the result that you wanted, but, trying my best to, have for all of the people who are calling me and saying, "Hey, Gomez, what are you doing?" You know, if I could feel that at the end of the day, I could answer them and say, "I heard you and we weren't able to do what you wanted us to do, and this is why." Or, I mean, or maybe there's some other, like trying to like really work with the various, because there is a lot of that, like, what are you doing?
Hmm. Hmm.
Or how can you help us? And it's very difficult to try to make everybody, you're
Yeah.
definitely not going to make everybody happy. So,
Yeah, for sure.
yeah.
Was there a specific moment in your career where you realized this is where I can make the biggest impact, whether it was in law or policy or public service?
It's a great question. I mean, I feel I have been very fortunate to have had many opportunities where I have felt like I can make a really big impact here.
Hmm.
And so I think that, part of it was definitely in becoming a lawyer,
Hmm.
that I felt like I can make a big impact here and be working with clients to help them achieve the goals that they want. Certainly when I, uh, had the opportunity to be nominated and to go through the whole process and eventually lead EBSA, I certainly, thought like I can make great amount of impact here in trying to, establish the narrative and build bridges and make actual changes here. So that was on a different level
Hmm.
because when you have the authority and you are actually directing what regulations are going to be made, how they're going to read, what changes will be done, and your signature is on those documents coming out. Um, that is, an immense feeling of I can make real change here. That being said, this next chapter that I am in, um, it has been surprising to me how empowered I feel in this new role to be able to make an impact and make change.
Hmm.
And while I definitely really, really loved being at EBSA and leading EBSA, I learned so much while I was there through dealing with so many, dealing with different problems, dealing with different subject matters that I hadn't necessarily dealt with before, certainly dealing with lots of different stakeholders that being someone who had worked so much in the multi-employer industry, before, and then going into this new world for me where, I hadn't worked with, so, whether they're different associations. It took me a while to learn, even just within the American Retirement Association, all of the different acronyms and who
Yes.
they were and what they did. And and I'm still learning, but I just got so much exposure to so many different groups. That was all like, really helpful to me. And so now coming out of that experience and just having met so many different people and being exposed to, and also just learning about the government apparatus and how things work. And even though in different administrations, certainly there are different priorities, things that operate differently, but knowing like some of this, like learning some things that I hadn't known before, I, in some ways, feel that I can be so much more impactful in this
Hmm.
role because you don't have you have all that knowledge and experience, but you don't have as many of the constraints that are upon you. I can speak freely, I don't
Yeah.
have to check with, especially when you're working on your own. I don't have to check with anybody except my own, the people on my shoulders. Like, can I do
Yeah.
this?
Yeah.
Can we do this? So, so being able to, that has felt, I feel like I can make a lot of impact
Hmm.
now. So I really consider it like I'm just, so fortunate to have these opportunities and to be able to find ways in which to keep building,
Hmm.
further and further up. And the most important thing to me in coming into this, looking at like what the next chapter was going to be, was exactly to your point. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I want to be able to do something where I feel that I can use everything that, everything that I have learned and gained and people I've met and all of that up to this point to
Hmm.
continue on this journey and make the most impact, in a positive way as I possibly can. And, so far it's been great. I mean, I didn't think anything could possibly match what I was doing, but it's really, it's been wonderful. So
That's awesome.
we'll see.
Congratulations. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
Um, your confirmation to lead EBSA came at a time of major retirement policy evolution. I mean,
Yeah.
major. We had Secure 2.0, we had the ESG debates, we had lifetime income discussions. How did that moment shape your agenda?
Yeah. That's a good one. I mean,
There was so much going on.
just, yeah. If I could have turned back time and had, tried to like plead to people in Congress, like I really, really wish I could have started, at the very beginning of the administration because
Hmm.
it would have been just, more time, but it would have given, I would have been able to focus on more things, within that time, just given the passage of time, but also, to your point, there was so much that was happening right then.
Hmm.
And so talk about being just like thrown into the fire, right? I started, I got confirmed at the end of September. I started at the agency on October 10th of 2022. And we were right, right in the heat of
Hmm.
working on the ESG role, prudence and
Yeah.
loyalty and plan investing. So, to have that be the first role coming out in final form, as I am getting there, it was really thrown straight into the fire, right? But it was good because, I mean, for me, you're just kind of like forced to learn process and everything that's happened up to that point and where are we and where are we going and how can I be helpful at this stage, and having to answer again hard questions, the like,
Yeah.
Gomez, what are you doing, or so that was definitely a huge learning experience, and but it was good to kind of have
Hmm.
that right away. And then, followed in very short order by Secure 2.0. So I feel like there were so many, for myself, asking myself, okay, like, what are your priorities going to be? and other people, like what are your priorities going to be when Congress hands you a law, that a lot of people have been working on very closely, without you involved, for a very long time. And then it's kind of handed to you on a silver platter and said, like, okay, here you go. There are things that need to be done. Your agency itself has like over 20 homework assignments,
Right.
within this, uh, and many of which need to be done in very short order, right? So figure it out. Like, even if you come in thinking, if I ever get confirmed, these are the things I want to do. A lot of those things kind of have to put on the side, or, think about,
Hmm.
okay, well, I have to deal with these things first. So, and yeah, Secure 2.0, not a little law, and not
No.
right. So, so it took a lot of working together with the members of the team at EBSA, um, who, are wonderful to work
Hmm.
with, but sitting down and thinking about, okay, we need to project plan this. We need to develop a list of like exactly what do we need to do, when do we need to do it by, and how are we going to accomplish that?
Hmm.
And so there was a lot, anything from developing, upstanding a whole new office within the Department of Labor on, to promote and educate about employee ownership. And for myself, to learn that community and learn what their needs were, what their challenges were, what the tension, talk about an exercise in like trying to use your mediation skills,
Right.
like the relationship between, those communities. So working on all of that, all of the various provisions of Secure 2.0, from like, the 95-1 report to the establishment of a whole new database,
Hmm.
lost and found database. I mean, all of these different things that came up. So there was a lot of project planning, and again, thinking of like how can we approach each of these tasks so that we can try to make meaningful progress, on all of them. But also like trying to think about it in not a check the box exercise to just
Hmm.
say like, I got a list of things to do. We have to be able to say, did these things. Like,
Right.
how are we going to do them in a meaningful way to try to accomplish what's behind, each of these things? And then also just managing expectations, because, without naming names, there were definitely, like, putting aside public stakeholders, there were members of Congress directly themselves, or, through their staffers, calling our office like in January saying, all right, like, where is it?
Oh
Like,
gosh.
where is this? We're like,
Yeah.
like, okay, we have until this time to do this. Like, it's not, you just gave us the law. So,
Right.
yeah, so it was definitely a lot of work, and, gave me such a high level of respect for the process and for all the different stakeholders who we did engage with and say, okay, we're going to have meetings and I need to hear from you, and how can we do this in an effective way? But also for the staff, at EBSA, and really seeing how for a small agency where, particularly like within the agency, the people who are responsible for, to work on these various things on top of all of the other stuff, that was
Hmm.
out there and happening. How can we, because we didn't have like, as compared to, as I learned, like Treasury and the IRS and HHS and these other agencies that are just tremendous
Hmm.
compared to the size of EBSA. We didn't have like a team that works on this and a team that works on
Right.
that. It was basically the same person, the same people are working on everything. So it was a lot of definitely a lot of work. But yeah, I
Yeah.
was proud of what we were able to do, in the time that we were there. And then throwing in
Yeah.
some extra things like a little fiduciary role.
Right. Exactly.
Why not? Let's just
Exactly.
throw that in there.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right.
You have spent time bridging gaps between regulators and industry groups. What did that experience teach you about collaboration versus enforcement?
Another really good question. I think that it taught me that there is a place for everything and that, we can't have one without the other,
Mhm.
and I'm sure there's lots of people, including myself sometimes, who say like, I wish we could just have collaboration and not have to worry about, being heavy-handed or having to, push on certain things. Or there may be some people, I would not fall within this, but that might say like, there's no room for collaboration. It's not going to happen, it's like why waste time? Like we should just
Mhm.
be like working on enforcement, whether it be, on a regulatory side or through litigation or, whatever the case may be.
Mhm.
And I think that, neither of those positions are the right position to just say we can have one versus the other. It has to be a combination of the both. And the
Mhm.
trick is really like finding out the balance there. Um, because, there are going to be bad actors.
Mhm.
You know, there are going to be times where, you really need pushes of enforcement. But at the same time, we have to give people space to be able to operate and try new things. And also to, think that sometimes, despite your best efforts, things don't turn out the right way,
Mhm.
or in the way that you would like to have them turn out the best. So I always tried my best to get a balance between the two and between collaboration and enforcement, and also to really, lean upon groups that were, did have very good intentions and were really trying to see improvements, to think about like how can we, like, that there are some people out there who you know
Mhm.
aren't going into things with the best intentions and aren't doing, like, how can we lift up the people who are trying to do things right, and like what help do they need? Like how can I be most helpful to them? Whether by giving them guidance or, just speaking out to help support them, or help giving them aids, to deal with some of the bad actors,
Mhm.
or some service providers that might not be helping them, like how can I help you to get there? Um, and also like how can you be using your voice so that when there are people who are quite frankly kind of making you look bad because they're not, like, how can we be
Mhm.
working together to try to both combat like what the issues are? And how can we also be trying to work with the people who are on the enforcement side to have them better understand, uh, on the practitioner side, on the plan sponsor side, what your realities are. And so, I tried really hard to like have
Mhm.
that balance, to have things like, where is it appropriate to have enforcement relief, right? Where is it important to really be working on like not dropping a hammer too soon and, trying to work with somebody in good faith. And I think most of the time that worked. Sometimes it's almost like being a parent in the sense that most of the times you hope that you can work with your kids and try to lead them in the right direction.
Right.
And sometimes you just have to step in and say, okay, you know, we
Yep.
can't, either we don't have time or you've done this too many times before, like whatever. But that balance is hard to find. And I certainly can't claim that I got it, right all of the time, but I definitely, tried to do that. And one just really quick example of where I thought that that was very necessary was in the area of ESOPs,
Mhm.
because I kind of walked into the whole ESOP you know, um, dynamic between, the ESOP community and the Department of Labor. I walked
Mm-hmm.
in as someone who did not have, skin in this game, right? I didn't really have I didn't have preconceived notions. Was walking in kind of, clear-headed and, and was trying very hard to, see how to come out of this with something that, again, not everybody's going to be happy with, but it's going to be helpful going forward. But one thing that I thought was really important was to, learn more about the ESOP community and employee-owned businesses that had ESOPs, and to
Mm-hmm.
have the people at the Department of Labor who were doing the enforcement and had seen instances where things had gone horribly badly, right?
Mm-hmm.
For them to be able to see the other side and to come in and meet people who had employee-owned companies and to see them like that they that they the good of it, and to
Right.
talk so that you could, because when you're only dealing with each other in bad situations, it's almost like a police officer who, like,
Yeah.
you only see people when they're doing bad things. So then, that's your perception. So, but if
Mm-hmm.
you, for the enforcement people at the Department of Labor to be able to interact with people outside of a audit or investigation situation, I do think that that was really, really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And, because it was kind of one step in the, in my, like, couples therapy for
Right.
yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Pardon me. During your
Yeah.
time at EBSA, what are you most proud of accomplishing that doesn't get enough attention?
Um, wow. I was most proud of accomplishing, I mean, I was most proud of accomplishing trying to get more information out there generally about EBSA itself, about the existence of the agency, what we do, how we can be helpful to people, whether it is just individual workers, employers, service providers, people on the Hill. I mean, everyone. I can't tell you how much at the beginning of my time there, I we would go and talk to people, whether it was someone on a podcast, with the media,
Mhm.
or going to visit someone on the Hill, or talking with individual workers, employers, and no one had heard of us and knew what we did. And um and certainly, that was not helpful, because if, to us as an agency, because everything from, if it's your mission to protect workplace benefits, but you kind of like sit there in a building on Constitution Avenue and no one knows that you're the ones to call or what to do, then, like,
Mhm.
why are we doing this, right? And also, if you need, resources from Congress, but no one in Congress knows that you're the agency that takes care of these things, then, like, why are they going to fight for you?
Mhm.
Why are they going to try to support you? And so, I do think that, I am proud of the work that we did to, like, start going in that direction, to make people more aware, to have more outreach, and to try to also work it and to try to also work with both the staff at EBSA and the
Mhm.
stakeholder community, in all of these different areas that we were working in, mental health and in retirement equity, to, like, think more about why we're doing these things,
Mhm.
like, why anything that we are working on, like, what's the purpose here? What are we trying to actually accomplish? And how can we make any of this meaningful? I came out of it really feeling like I had shifted some perspectives on how to
Mhm.
look at these things. So again, would have loved to have had more time to continue
Yeah.
to develop it. But so I'm proud of that. I'm also just really proud of I learned very quickly that that the people